Okay, good to go.
Thank you, Sam. So the topic of my talk today is Jinns, Muhabbat, and Mithai, code switching for horror in Ayesha Muzaffar's short stories. Jinnistan and Bhabis of Lahore, two collections of short stories by Ayesha Muzaffar, have recently gained immense popularity among the Pakistani readers of English fiction. In this talk, I will discuss two overarching elements used for the creation of horror in these short stories, which are code switching and romantic love. My argument is that code switching between Urdu and English in these short stories amplifies horror through a combination of proximity and distance. And the elements of romantic love in Muzaffar's fiction mostly revolves around the complexity of sexual relationships between the human and the non-human other. The non-human other is rooted in cultural mythologies and exhibits a vast range of characters, including, but not limited to, Jinn, Churail, Chalawa, Ifrit, and so on. Because there isn't a direct translation for many of the non-human characters, so that's why I'm using the exact words that are used in the fiction. So my analysis of Muzaffar's distinctive national style has therefore two sections. One section focuses on code switching for horror, and the other on the relationship between horror and romantic love. I understand code switching as a linguistic phenomenon that refers to the practice of alternating between two or more languages or language varieties. Laurie Barnes maintained that code switching is a deliberate choice for a specific purpose. So in a movie or a text, when the speaker or writer alternates between two languages, one of the languages can be regarded as the unmarked choice, which is the language that the speaker or the writer would normally be expected to use in that context. When the other language, normally the embedded language, is regarded while the other language, normally the embedded language, is regarded as a marked language. The marked language can play a significant role in creating an outsider identity. I argue that Muzaffar code switches to Urdu to create her own brand of horror fiction, which primarily targets Pakistani readers and the South Asian readers by association. The unmarked language of her horror narratives is English, and the marked language is Urdu. While the list of authors writing in English who are living in Pakistan and authors with Pakistani origins living outside the country has increased at an amazing pace in the 21st century, majority of these authors write for the global Anglophone readership. While most Pakistani authors writing in English use Urdu words sparingly, and only when the English alternate is either unavailable or not suitable enough, Muzaffar's prose effortlessly and unapologetically switches to Urdu without any logic or necessity. I say unapologetically because the everyday urban Urdu used in the text is neither italicized nor a glossary is provided at the end. In many stories, not only words, but significant lines carrying plot twists are in Urdu, written with the English alphabet generally known as Roman Urdu. Code switching to Urdu in Muzaffar's stories works as a literary device to create and highlight horror. This horror stems out of the everyday and often carries a playfulness which helps in creating the thrilling shock effect for the readers. Sam, can you play the slide? So, the first slide shows how in the first story of Jinnistan, the hero Yavar does not believe in jinns and has always been interested in physics and law. He believed that supernatural was nothing but those things that have, but it's only those things that have not been explained yet by science. Later on, Yavar finds a siren on the beach and makes love with her, regardless of the consequences and the warnings from the siren herself. The development of the horror narrative works along the code switching to Urdu. Phrases like Nangi Pangi and Bhai Bhen are urban, playful Urdu slangs. Nangi Pangi means women showing skin in modern dresses, and Bhai Bhen means brother and sister. Then we come across the grandmother or Dadi Amma, who has khajur or the date fruit like feet. Baat Paki stands for his engagement ceremony. The Urdu words, as you see on the slide, they intensify after he meets the Been Wali Aurat or the siren. So the Been Wali Aurat, Been is the trumpet, and Wali is the association, and Aurat stands for woman. So the woman carrying the trumpet or the one with the voice and so on. The playfulness and light-hearted tone of Urdu words and phrases vanishes as the horror of the situation creeps in on the readers. The story ends with his inability to say Bismillah or the Kalma, a climax that the Muslim Pakistani readers of Jinnistan will respond to immediately. I refer to Philip Talon here, who states that through the lens of horror, we are reminded of the fragility of our existence and the potential darkness that lies within ourselves and the world around us. Horror, in this way, shows us our inherent skepticism about absolute progress. As we gain more and more mastery of the world, it can be easy to forget that, deep down, we still lack mastery of ourselves. In Jinnistan, small everyday Urdu words are embedded in the descriptions of settings and characters in the stories and leads to the final surprise horror spectacle. For example, in the story titled Bhari Naam translates as a heavy name, something that is going to do the heavy lifting. So in colloquial Urdu, heavy or bhari stands for the inexplicable effect of the supernatural that a person or a place is burdened with. This story shows a girl who changes her name from Zirek to Zania and is presumably haunted by the spirit of her maternal grandmother, her Nani, who named her Zirek with much love. The girl lives peacefully with the change of name, but falls terribly ill when she is about to get married with the changed name. There are many Urdu descriptors of everyday objects like jhag wali chai, which means rich foamy tea, mithai, meaning the traditional sweets, and karhai wale kapre, meaning embroidered clothes, and phrases like dhaki chupi mulaqat, which means secret meeting between lovers. The happy tone of the Urdu words, just like the story on the slide, the happy tone of the Urdu words take the reader to the chilling description of a woman hanging from the ceiling fan who looks like Zirak or Zania's mother. The frightened girl shared that the fan was spinning, and the woman who looked like her mother was sitting on the fan like a frog and kept smiling at her. While the Pakistani or South Asian reader can understand the description, which is written in Roman Urdu, and connect the resemblance of the mother with the grandmother and heave a sigh of relief when the grandmother's spirit leaves the girl alone at the time of the morning prayer, Fajr, no attempt is made to explain the horror to the possible readers in the Anglosphere. Similarly, in modern pyar, which pyar means love, in modern pyar, all the conversation between characters and the horror highlight is written in Urdu, which makes it very difficult for readers not familiar with the language. Therefore, the code switching to Urdu works not only for the creation of horror, but also for advanced decolonization of the horror genre fiction. These books are published by a small independent publishing house in Pakistan, and we don't have a big publishing house in Pakistan. And although these books can reach readers across the globe through Amazon, their target readers are the small percentage of elite and upper middle class readers in Pakistan who are comfortable with the English language. However, my other research on the national bookish practices has shown that readers in elite socioeconomic class are not interested in fiction, especially genre fiction produced by Pakistani authors. Nonetheless, Muzaffar has a huge fan following on Instagram, and her author brand lies in claiming ownership of the horror genre and deploying it right next to her intended readers by wearing patterns of code switching. The elements of fear and existential anguish are rooted in the urban scary stories that are a part of the English-speaking Pakistani readers' everyday existence. The question of romance in Muzaffar's fiction is complicated and very difficult to answer with reference to the extant scholarship on horror genre fiction. The closest Anglophone equivalent of Muzaffar's love stories is Gothic romance. According to traditional Anglophone definition, Gothic romances must feature falling in love as a major element and have a happy ending. However, the boundaries of Gothic romance have become flexible with a critique produced in the recent years. Hollyhurst writes that for a text to be considered a Gothic romance, the love story needs to be of either equal or greater importance than the other elements, with significant narrative concentration on the development of the relationship, whether in form of a dedicated narrative time, or with an implicit relationship between the love story and the other narrative developments. However, by focusing on fear and transgression as the definitional core of the Gothic romance is relegated automatically to a secondary plane. A lesser form of the Gothic due to their central concentration on the possibility of love and desire within the frequently heterosexual love relationship. The Gothic romance, therefore, is pervaded by the atmosphere of threat. The threats of Gothic romance are the same as those of the wider Gothic, threats associated with the supernatural and natural forces, imaginative excesses and delusions, religion and human evil, social transgression, mental disintegration, and spiritual corruption. It is not just a heroine in peril, but a world in peril, a whole world shared by the protagonist and reader. Our identification with the Gothic romance's protagonist leaves open the possibility of these threats escape from the text, whether it is the fear of the male brutality. There are, when I'm going to extrapolate this, there are explicit examples in which women who are threatened by men in the society, they find comfort in the other world. So, the fragility of the psyche, paranoid suspicion, or moral ambiguity. Extrapolating Hurst's theorization to Muzaffar's horror fiction, I argue that heterosexual romantic love works with and adds to the element of fear and terror. Unlike the stories of unrequited love between jinns and human beings on national television, which I've discussed in the other talk that Sam has mentioned in the beginning of this talk, heterosexual human and non-human couples find their horrific happily ever after in ways that are similar to and uncannily different from the existing patterns of courtship and marriage in Pakistani culture. In the narratives of Jinns and Bhabis of Lahore, men are in committed relationships with sirens, churails, and other types of non-human females, and women fall in love with and live happily ever after with the male jinns and non-human others. All love stories are exclusively heterosexual, as the concept of queer is unacceptable and highly controversial in our patriarchal and religious society. In an article that is titled Investigation of Gothic Marxism and Ayesha Muzaffar's Jinnistan, the authors discuss the characters' experiences with ghosts and the concealed political agenda in horror fiction. They argue that her fiction highlights the temptations and miseries brought by capitalism, and the narratives aim to dissect the injustices faced by the middle class and horrors of capitalism. Another, more nuanced article on Pakistani Urdu horror stories published in Popular Digest, Jorgen Schelener examines the trope of the Hindu as it appears in the Der Digest magazines. Der is fair. So there are the Horror Digest, the National Horror Digest in Urdu is titled Der, that is fair. So in the digest, while the Muslim characters emerge as noble saviors and wise father figures, righteously guarding their religious brethren and the rest of the world from the claws of Hindu spiritual imperialism, Hindu power is a threat that manifests itself in black magic, which requires blood-curdling ritual objects such as owls with twisted necks, human hearts, or the blood of several virgins. The stories show pious Muslim jinns who work under the command of pious Muslim warrior heroes. Muzaffar's fiction does not carry the prevalent Muslim and Hindu tropes of the Urdu horror digest fiction, probably because her target readership is located in the liberal upper middle class or educated middle class. But the role of religion in the conflicts and encounters between the human and the non-human is highlighted throughout Muzaffar's work. Pakistani horror fiction in Urdu and English is in desperate need of scholarly exploration that contextualizes and extend it in the broad domain of Gothic studies. In this talk, I'm only concerned with providing a brief glimpse into Muzaffar's romance narratives and providing any attempt to now define the entire genre of Pakistani horror romance through these two collections of stories by a single author writing in English. Sometimes the tale of love or heterosexual union is the primary spectacle of horror. For example, in Bhabis of Lahore, Bhabis, by the way, mean the brother's wife, and it is also a respected form of address used for women with whom one is not acquainted with. So the first story in this collection is about a man who has had 6 broken marriages because he was married to a goat jinn at a young age when he used to visit his supernatural grandfather or Nana, maternal grandfather, in the mountains. There's no hint of romance in this tale, and the union works only as a literary device to bring out the various elements of horror and Gothic. However, in the very short story, which is just 3.5 pages long, I think, in the Jinnistan collection, the hero falls in love with a non-human female that possesses his wife. The complicated narrative suggests that the hero and the non-human find sexual fulfillment when the wife's body is in an unholy state. The title of the story is Aam Aurat. Aam stands for, Aam means mango, and Aurat means woman. So the literal translation would be mango woman. The love stories follow the matrimonial rituals and customs prevalent in the conservative Pakistani society, where the parents search for the rishtas, which mean the matrimonial matches for prospective brides and grooms. In Muzaffar's horror fiction, Mithai or sweets are closely connected to the romantic love tropes and play a significant role in the creation of horror. Sam, can we have the second slide? For example, in the story titled Mithai, heroine Anam is selected as bride for a jinn boy by his family. They meet Anam in the sweet shop that her father owns, and later she vanishes a day before her wedding to join her jinn in-laws, who have shown her a glimpse of the glamour and splendor that awaits in their world, the other world. The description of Mithai blends with the descriptions of the heroine and ultimately becomes the cause of her happily ever after in another world. I'm now showing some of the Mithais listed in the stories. I still missed some Mithais, but most of them are here. You'll see Rasgulla, Gulab Jamun, Jalebi, Cham Cham, Barfi, Savaiya, and Laddu. Most of these sweets are fried, and then they are dipped in a sugar syrup called shira to make them sweet. Anam's father, Mr. Amir, holds her very dear and calls her sweeter than gur. Now, gur is not a mithai, but an unrefined form of sugar that is used in many traditional sweet dishes. The sweeter than gur Anam becomes shira less after she meets the Jinn family, visiting her father's famous sweet shop. So shira less, like devoid of any shira, any sweetness, and of course, if we bring in the water imagery, the sap of life, and so on. The horror lies in the mithai that attracted the Jinn family to the human sweet-selling shop and ultimately sealed Anam's fate. I would like to mention that there are innumerable tales of Jinn visitors and customers that are associated with some old mithai shops in Lahore, and some of these shops were established before the partition of the subcontinent. The sweets become the culminating point of a horror that the readers will find so close to them. When Anam's wedding is to a 200-year-old jinn is celebrated with mithai from her father's famous shop, of course, the readers can relate to the horror of the mithai that they see around them every day. Muzaffar also uses mithai as a metaphor of distress and an indication of some inexplicable supernatural phenomena. In the story, Mera Mehtab, Mera means mine, so Mehtab is the main character, so my Mehtab. The character of Laiba is compared to a broken laddu. You can see laddus at the right corner of the slide. So there's a broken laddu there as well. So the narrator says that my nano, my maternal grandmother, always said that in the box of most perfect milk laddus, there's always a laddu crushed at the bottom, out of shape, and if you go person to person, offering the box of sweets, no one would pick that laddu. And at this moment in time, the laddu was Laiba. Laiba leaves her home right after she has been compared to a laddu by the narrator, as she feels she will never get the love of her husband. Her husband was already in love with her at that point in the story, but he did not show that, and his happily ever after finally happened with his bhabhi, his brother's ex-wife. In more straightforward and less complicated romances, like the never happening shadi of Shazia Farooq, so never happening shadi of Shazia Farooq, she does get married both to the non-human and the human, but still the title is the never happening shadi. So the non-human hero meets the heroine Shazia through a formal matchmaking process, but his proposal is rejected and ignored by the heroine's father. He stays with Shazia and they meet at night, and their meetings together are only noticed by the dogs in the alley. Musa, the non-human hero, assures her that they will be together even if she is married to her cousin. The story ends with Shazia expecting Musa's son, assured of their happily ever after. So, as I discussed in the previous version of the talk as well, that Musa is the closest to a vampire hero in the narratives. We don't have an exact equivalent of vampire, but he's the closest because he sleeps all the time, and of course, the heroine's father finds him very cringe. In Muzaffar's narratives, romantic love is sometimes called pyar and sometimes it is muhabbat. It exists between jinns, ifrit, churails, and the girls and boys next door. The varieties of non-human and the human are placed next to each other against a backdrop that is eerily close to the predominantly Pakistani or South Asian readers. I wish to make this talk more detailed, but I hope to share more of my research findings in the question and answer session with the participants here today. Thank you so much, Sam.